Hello and welcome to Red 5 Scale Models. I've been doing this hobby for about 5 years now, and over that time picked up quite a lot of information, a lot of tips and tricks from mainly YouTube and books and things, and I thought I would pass some of that on to you. I'm relatively new to this YouTube malark, so apologies in advance if there's a lot of close-ups of my nail-bitten, paint-encrusted hands and the focus is a little bit shot. But hopefully a couple of people will learn a few tips and tricks from the next couple of videos I make, and if you like it, stick a like below, or follow me on @Red5Models on Twitter. Thanks. I've been asked by a few people on Twitter how I go about painting some of the figures that I use in some of the builds that I do, and I thought it would be worthwhile putting a little tutorial together. No BS, pretty straightforward, hopefully pretty quick, just how I go about doing it. They aren't going to win you any painting categories, figure painting categories in any competitions, but what they hopefully should be is more than adequate to add on to things like sort of armor builds, dioramas, small scale scenes, vignettes and things. So yeah, let's get started. Yep, as I said, no BS, jumping straight in. We're going to start with 4 basic tones, all from the Citadel range of paints. We've got a Bugman's Glow, Acadian Flesh Tone, Kislev Flesh, and a Flayed One's Flesh, all at the top of the screen, just there. And what I've done is basically, between each 4, I've done a 50-50 mix of each tone as we go down, creating 8, and the last one's diluted down with some white there. So you've got a 50-50 mix of the Bugman's Glow and the Acadian Flesh Tone, and a 50-50 of the Acadian Flesh Tone and the Kislev Flesh, and so on. Add a bit of water to them, and then basically what you need to do is get your figure. In this case we've got this lad here. He's part of an evolution set which is going on the BTR diorama that you saw earlier. And then basically start the ball rolling with 2 very, very thin coats of the base Bugman's Glow. I'll come back to you once I've finished this and it's dry. So that's 2 base coats done there now. Don't worry if you can still see some of the primer. We're going to take care of that at a later date. And this is going to move on to the eyes, which is the thing that daunts a lot of people. Be as careful as you can. I use brilliant white. Some people say to use an off-white. Whatever you think works. Don't worry if you kind of make a bit of a mess of it like that, or it looks a bit of a bloody awful. But just paint it in as best you can. Little neat trick I find for trying to get the eyes symmetrical is if you turn the figure upside down. Sorry, it's a bit out of focus. And work it. It helps keep the eyes symmetrical, and it's the same when you come to do the pupils at a later date. But don't worry about getting it a bit of a mess. Just get that white down, get a decent coverage. You probably might need 2 coats depending on how thick, because white paint's quite thin. And then once I've done that and tidied it up, I'll come back to you. I've got the whites of the eyes in there, and until recently, basically every figure I've ever painted has looked a bit like this.
Who made that man a gunner?
I did, sir. He's my cousin.
And taking time, get your nice thin brush, and paint in the pupil as best you can. And that. I'm sorry if it goes out of focus for the next couple of bits, but this is obviously, you can imagine, quite a delicate thing to have to do. Now what I do, like I did for the eye before, I turn it upside down and then paint in again as neatly as I can the other pupil. And it just helps keep the eyes that little bit straighter. You're never going to get them perfectly straight, but again at this scale it's just to give the illusion that their eyes are there. So once that dries and I've tidied it up a little bit, I'll come back to you for the next step. Okay, so that's the eyes tidied up there, the pupils drawn, painted in. You can skip this next step if you want, but I do it force a habit from the good old days of just sticking a wash all over models. But I take a colour called Raglan Flesh Tone from the Citadel range of paints, and basically give the whole, any flesh areas, fingers, toes, whatever, a good wash, letting it flow into all of the recesses. You need to make sure to be very careful around the eyes, but if a little bit gets on the eyes, that's fine, because it'll make them look a bit bloodshot. And give it a nice coat. If you find that it pools, like it's done, I've done it deliberately there on the mouth, dry your brush off. Just use a brush to soak up some of that, and this is all just to help add to the tone. There, it's pooled majorly. Just dry your brush off, suck some of it back up with your brush. So once I've tidied this up, I'll show you how it looks when it's dry, and I'll be back to you. Okay, so now we're back. That's the Raglan Flesh shade, completely dry there. And basically this is when you start to do the actual painting of the mini itself, of the face itself. So again, you've got your colours there, you've got your Bugman's Glow right down to your very lightest shade, and it's just a case of working across the face, and as you go down the colours, or in terms of darkest to lightest, you then work your way up the contours of the face. Gradually get putting less and less paint on, until you get the final highlights. So you start with the Bugman's Glow. Now a little tip I like to use is to always start on the nose. It gives you a good idea of how much paint you've got in your brush. And this layer, other than the very deepest recesses of the face, should pretty much cover about probably 90% of the face. And I'll not do the whole of this in real time, I'll speed it up, but just to give you an idea of where we're at the moment. Now you want multiple thin light coats, and you need to try and keep the paint as wet as possible. Work with it while it's nice and wet.
Oh, matron, take them away!
So that's the first layer of Bugman's Glow down. So now you need to go down to the mid Bugman's Glow Cadian Flesh Tone. Again, starting with the nose. This time, work your way up the contours of the face. Don't put it on quite as much. Things like the cheekbones. Again, trying to keep it moving, keeping it going quick. Again, this is going to cover probably about 75% of the face. Just things like down the sides of the nose. And then work your way up from there. So I'll speed it up now and work until I get the last few steps. I'll just keep this going so you can kind of see how I'm doing it and what I'm working on as I go. Okay.
Many minutes later. Okay, so I'm getting near the end now. Now I'm down to pretty much the bare flayed one flesh. So with this one, very extremities of his face, things that would really catch the light. And then if you find you've done it a little bit OTT, drop down a shade or two, tiny little bit on the brush, just help blend it back in. Again, blend it back in till you're back with that blend. go as far as you want with this. It is, like I say, for dioramas. It isn't to win competitions in figure painting. That is a completely different discipline. It's just to give an idea of life in the scene. And then, sorry, that's where we're at currently. And then the last but not least, the white and Pt1 flesh. This is very, very bright, so you're talking the tiniest of tips, tiny dots, just to get the effect of light reflecting off his cheeks, off his face, and that's pretty much it done. So I'll let that dry and I'll come back to you to finish up. Okay, so that's the face finished. I must admit, I actually went back in and tarted it up a little bit and messed about with it. I noticed that his eye was a little bit too big, things like that, but it was exactly the same process I went through. Just added a few extra highlights, made his cheeks a little bit more red, a little bit darker, and that's it done. And it's, like I say, it's not going to win any major competitions, but it will kind of fit nicely in with a diorama or a vignette or a small scale build that you're making. Just add a bit of depth and kind of life into your scenes. So I hope it's helped at least one person out there, and if you liked it, stick a like below or give me a follow on Twitter at Red5Models, and hopefully get to do more of these, finish off the rest of the figure at some point, and see you all soon.